creating well-designed slices in Power BI. Got that out of my system. However, instead of complaining, let's have a look at what formatting options are there and how we can use them to create well-designed slices in Power BI. Let's get started. Welcome to How to Power BI. My name is Bas, and if this is the very first time for you visiting this channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my videos in which I share everything I know about Power BI. Now let's have a look how we can upgrade the design of our slicers. Now I have here already an example report to which we are going to add a normal slicer. Okay, so here in the visualization section, let's choose the slicer and I'm going to put it here on the left hand side of my report. And then in the field section, we can choose the field we want to use on the slicer. Let's say the department field. And there you go, we have a slicer. So now we can hold the control key and click on the checkboxes to say which departments we want to filter on. And all of the other visuals on the report page nicely get filtered. Okay, now it works, it's functional, however, not so pretty. So what are some design changes that we can make to the slicer to make it look a little bit better? Now let's first do some straightforward ones before we get into the more tricky workaround. Now let's say we are not going to have many slices on this report page. So our slicer can take a bit more space. Then instead of checkboxes, we can convert our items into buttons. Now how can we do that? Well, simply take your slicer, go to formatting options, and then here under slicer settings, we can change the orientation from vertical to horizontal. And then you see we have buttons. Now the layout might be a little bit off at the beginning. Now what is important is that here under general and then properties, here we have, for the advanced options, responsiveness on. Okay, now this one you have to leave on, because if you turn it off, then all of the buttons, well, they're horizontally next to one another and we want to have them somehow vertically. Okay, now there's no option to change the grid layout. So instead of that, we can just play around a little bit with the width until the buttons pop up right below one another. And then we can make it a little bit higher. And now you see over here, if we make it high enough, we have the different departments right below one another. Okay, so you have to play around with the size a little bit until it nicely fits. Now, if this is one of the few slices on your report page and everybody within the company knows what each item means, then maybe the title or the slider header is not really necessary. So for now, I'm just going to turn that one off. All right, so now that we have this, let's see what other formatting options are there under the visual tab. So if we go here and open the values group, then in here you see we can change the font size, font color, we can add borderlines, and we can play around with the background color. Okay, now one that's often overlooked is the border. Now that is because, well, if you put a border on every side of each item, well, it doesn't really look nice. However, if you just keep the border on the left hand side, just like this, and you make it as wide as possible, which is 10. That is the maximum. Then you see it starts to look quite interesting, especially if you go for maybe a different color than gray. So maybe you want to make it a little bit brighter so that it stands out a little bit more. So for example, red works pretty well here, or we could go for maybe yellow. Now you see this already gives it a little bit more of a modern look. Now what else could we do? Well, we could go here to the background color, and maybe we want to make it the same as the background behind the slicer. So let me go there, more colors, and I'm going to give it the same color, which is this silver gray. So 240, 243, 247. All right. Now it would be nice, of course, if we could also give a different color to the selected items, but that's not possible. So it is always black, which is a huge limitation. And of course, I also hope that in the future, we can also set different colors for the selected item, would be nice. However, instead of complaining about it, how can we integrate it into our design? Well, I think this already looks quite okay, but what you could also do is to go again to your border. And then here, instead of yellow, you choose the same color black. Now it's not the deep black, this one. However, you have to go 2 up, so 20% lighter. That's the same color black, you see? And this also creates an interesting effect, because now when the item is selected, the background is black and you have the same color borderline on the left hand side. So the whole thing is black. And if it's not selected, then only the borderline on the left hand side is visible. So you see, working in a good way with borders can really uplift the design of your slicer. Now, another thing that you could do is work with shapes. in combination with the slicer. So an obvious example would be if we go here to insert and then shapes, we could add a rectangle behind the slicer. All right, so if I go here and place that rectangle on the left hand side, and now we have to make sure that the rectangle doesn't overlap the slicer, but the other way around. So let's take the shape, go here to format, and then here send it backwards. Now you see, having the shape in the back of the slicer creates a little bit of structure and separates the slicer from the rest of the report. However, now that we have this background shape, maybe you want to change the color again of the items that are not selected. So we could, for example, instead of having the same silver gray background, we could go for a green background. So if I go over here to values again, and then background, and then here I can set the color to the same color green. And then for the values, I can choose, let's say, white. And you see now when an item is not selected, it has the same color as the background shape, and only the borderline on the left hand side is visible. And when selected, it's black. Now, I think that looks pretty good, but we can use shapes in more ways than just a background. Now what we could also do is take the shape and make it much smaller. So it's going to be one vertical line. And then I'm going to take the slicer, and here I'm going to turn the border lines off for now. Okay, so I'm going to hit the border, turn it off, and then I'm going to take my shape and I'm going to make sure that it overlaps the slicer. Now to make sure it overlaps, we have to bring it to the front again. So format and bring it forward. All right, now to add a little bit of an extra effect, we can go here to general, effects, and then here I would like to have a shadow on the right hand side. Okay, now also here that shape doesn't have to be green. We could also make this one again the same color as the selected item, because the selected item, well, is always black, at least for now. So we can take over here the shape, go to style, and then here we can choose again that black, that's 20% lighter. All right, and you have to also make sure that the shape doesn't have a borderline, because now that green borderline is also visible. And that's it. It nicely integrates with the selected items. Of course, you can get very creative with all of the shapes that you find either here in Power BI, or you can create your own shape in PowerPoint or Photoshop and use that here in Power BI and then integrate that with your slicer. Now, would this also work when we have a horizontal layout for a slicer? For example, if we want to have it at the top of our page. Now, let's give this a try. For example, here we can take the shape and put it all the way at the top. Then also here I have to push it to the back. So over here, send backwards. And then we can take the slicer and put it here at the top of a report and resize it. And as soon as we start resizing it, and then you see also the buttons pop up right next to one another because, well, it's actually a horizontal layout. It's just how we set it to responsive. And over here, we can resize it to look a little bit better. Now, at the moment, you might be a little bit confused whether it is the green ones that are selected or the black ones. So let's maybe change the design a bit. So I'm going to take here the shape and let's make here the fill color green. And then I just have to change my font color of the title. Let's make it white again. And then for the buttons, we can do the same trick as before. And we can take the slicer, go to format, and we can work with the borders again. So let's go here to border. And now I would put the border at the bottom, just like this. And when selected, for example, let's select format over here, then the whole item is black. If it's not selected, then it only has the borderline that's visible. Now to finish our button slices, I would still do one last thing. Let's go here to format your visual. And then here we can go to selection and I would turn off multi-select with control key, which just makes it a little bit easier to use. So now you might think, oh, that looks good, these slicer buttons. However, I want to have that normal slicer with the checkboxes or something similar to these checkboxes where we had the items vertically from one another. All right, now what design options do we have then to make that look better? Now let's go back to the beginning where we had our normal slicer, this one over here, and let's see what we find in the formatting options. Now, first of all, if we go to the visual values, then over here you see we have, well, the same options as before. So we can play around with the borders again, with the backgrounds for the items. And we can go also here in the values and play around with the padding, for example. Now, something that we didn't do before. If we add a bit of padding, you see, we create a little bit more space, more white space, which can also already look a little bit better. Then for the slicer header, which is this what we have here at the top, well, it lets us clear the selection and change from a list to, let's say, a drop down. However, if you don't need that, because we just have a few items, right? we don't necessarily need this clear selection button, then we can also turn it off. Now, why would you want to do that? Because instead of the header, we could just go for a title. And with a title, you have more formatting options than with the header. All right, so here we have to type in something for text, otherwise it doesn't show. So department. And let's say we want to have it a little bit bigger, put it in the middle, and maybe you want to change the text color. All right, so just play around with it. Okay, good. Now let's place it for now here on the left-hand side. Now then, let's add a little bit of a background color. Let's go for white. And let's put the transparency to 0. Okay, now nothing mind-blowing yet. Now, but what I want to do next is going to be a bit tricky. I want to change the icons that we have for the checkboxes. So instead of squares and filled squares, I want to have something completely different. For example, just lines, or maybe like a check mark or crosses, whatever you want. Any character basically. Now, how could we do that? Now, let's first create a little bit of space. So I'm going to take here this bar chart. I'm just going to slide it here to the right hand side. Now, to achieve what we are looking for, we need to use other visuals and integrate that with a slicer. Now, the first example is going to make use of a bar chart. So let's take over here a normal bar chart. Let's place it over here on the right hand side. And let's make it a little bit bigger. And then we can go here to dim department. We want to have a breakdown by the departments. And over here, I would like to have a bar for each department. Now, for that, we're going to create a dummy measure. Now, let's do that. I'm going to click here on the 3 dots, do measure. And let's call this one slicer highlight show. All right, and I'm just going to set the value to 1. Then we can take that measure and add it here on the x-axis. And you see that gives us an equally sized bar for each department. However, as soon as I select one of the departments in the slicer, of course, that bar chart gets filtered. Even when I would go here to that field and say, okay, show items with no data, well, the filter is still applied. So how can I make sure that all of the departments show again? Now, of course, I could turn off the filter interaction, but I still need to have that later on to only show a bar for the selected item. And if I turn the interaction off, that's not possible. So what's the workaround? We need a disconnected table. A disconnected table with one column that contains the departments. Okay, now how can we create that table in an easy way? Just go to the Home tab. Let's click here on Enter Data. And let's call this table SLICER Design. Okay, now here we just need to have one department column with all of the department names. So just one by one, type them in. Just make sure that you don't make any typo. And once you're done, just click on Load. Now, once that is done, you can switch to the modeling view. And it might be that Power BI creates automatically a relationship between dim department and slicer design. This is not what we want, because that's exactly the point. We don't want dim department to filter slicer design. So right click on the relationship, delete it. All right. And then we turn back to your report view. Now here for the bar chart, let's take this one again. Replace department with department from slicer design. And you see now this one is not filtering our bar chart so that all of our departments show. All right, but we only want to have a bar for the selected item. So when eye care is selected over here, I only want to show a bar for eye care over there and not for the other ones. So we have to make an adjustment to that measure, that dummy measure that we wrote here. So instead of 1, what we could do is we could say if, bracket open, then check the selected value of slicer design department. Okay, so we take basically the value of that one and check if it's in, well, the values, the selected values of department in dim department. Okay, and if it is, then we want to show it. So we return the value 1, and otherwise nothing, so we leave it blank. Okay, so this basically just checks if the department item in the design table is selected in the slicer over there. Okay, that's it. Now you might be surprised because not all of the departments show just yet, because we have to go here to a department on the y-axis and show items with no data. And because we replaced it with the new one from slicer design. Okay, and then you see all of the departments show. However, we only show a bar for the one that is selected over there. So if I also select farmer, there you go, we have 2 bars. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that well, we sort them in the same way. So here we have the departments sorted alphabetically. So we have to do the same in a bar chart. So let's do this. Sort by department. And we have to make sure that we sort in ascending order. So now the main idea is there, because if I make my selection over here, we have a bar over there in the bar chart. Okay, now how can we use that? Well, at the moment, we have all of these other items that we're actually not interested in. So those I want to get rid of. So if we go here to the bar chart, format, I want to get rid of that y-axis. I want to get rid of the x-axis and the grid lines. And here in the general, I don't want to have the title. Okay, and now here we can also give this one a background color. So if we go here to general, effects, background, white. Okay, so the same color as the slicer has. And then I make it less white. And you see, oh, it doesn't show anymore. Well, we still have to go here then to properties, advanced options, and turn responsiveness off. So now we have to somehow align these bars with the items. So I'm going to take this, drag it here on the left-hand side. And you see it's almost aligned already. I'm going to resize it just like this. And then the last part, well, that I usually do here in the general properties. And then here we have size, there we have position, and you just have to play around with it until it is perfectly aligned. So once you have done that, we can test it. So let's select one of the other items, deselect it again. You see over here, we have now that little bar on the left-hand side. Okay, now of course, the downside is that you have to click on the items themselves. You cannot click on the checkboxes anymore because we have a different visual that, well, overlaps a part of the slicer. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. All right, then another thing that's important is that you have seen that when I click on it, the slicer pops to the front, then I deselect the slicer and it pops back to the background. Okay, now this also happens when you publish it. However, not if you make the following change. So if you select the slicer and then you go here to format your visual, general, properties, then here, advanced option, you have maintain layer order. That is important. Turn that on for both of the visuals. And with that turned on, well, it will still come to the front here in Power BI Desktop, but not when you publish it. So let me do that quickly. If we go here to Home, Publish, and now here in Power BI Service, you see I can just click on the items and it still looks good. Okay, so now back to Power BI Desktop, because we're not done just yet. We can still do better. Now, instead of just having then a bar, well, you can have also different items, right? So we can go back here to the bar chart and we can also add over here arrow bars. Why would you want to do that? Because with arrow bars, we have again different shapes that we can then use instead of, well, basically these little bars that we're showing. So let's make use of that. I'm going to take Slicer Highlight Show, put that for the upper bound, turn the arrow bars on, and then here we can go to the bar, and here we can say that we want to have a different shape. So let's, for example, go here for a circle. And you see part of the circle gets cut off. So to fix that, just go back to the formatting options for the x-axis and put here the maximum to 2. You see that already looks better. Now here, the next thing that we could do is then give the same color for these little circles. So I'm going to go back here to arrow bars and then go to the bar section, bar color, and then choose green. Now I think that looks kind of interesting, the combination of the arrow icon, whatever you choose there, and the bar itself. So you can leave it like this. Or what you could also do is here under formatting options for the bars, just choose then a white color so that you have only the little circle, or maybe you want to have something different. You can also go for, let's have a look, maybe a triangle like this. So it looks like a little arrow for the selected items. Now let's see if that works. So I'm going to select one other item and there you go. Perfect. Now for the whole slicer, we could also add a little bit of shadow to finish it. So over here in the general effects, let's go for a bit of shadow and that's our slicer. All right, now look at a variation of this approach where we do not use a bar chart, but a matrix or a normal table instead, which gives even more options because then you can completely customize the icon that you want to show, with Unicode characters. Okay, now the idea is kind of similar. All right, so let's start from scratch again. So let's now delete that bar chart that we used before. Let's delete that one so that we just have that normal slicer. And then we can create a table and put that right next to our slicer. So over here. And on that table, we want to have, slicer highlight show, and we want to have department from slicer design. Okay, now similar idea as before. Now you will not see all of the departments because we still have to click on the department field and say that we want to show items with no data. Okay, now I'm going to resize a little bit so that you see a bit better. And there you go. Now, the next thing that we need to do is get rid of all of the formatting elements that we don't need. Okay, so for example, if we go here to formatting, then I first of all don't want to have the totals. So let's turn the totals off. And the next thing that we can do is here for style presets, let's go for none. And the next thing that we could do is change the background color for the alternating rows. So we go here to values, and then here we have alternate background color. Let's choose white. And then here we also have the grid line. So let's go to grid. Let's turn that one off. And then that border line under the column headers, that's border. Then we want to have column header. Let's turn that off. Now the column headers themselves, you cannot just get rid of, would have been nice. However, we can make them disappear or not visible by doing the following. We can go here to column headers, and then we have text color. Let's choose white. Now also here for the table, you need to make sure that the departments are in the same order as the departments in the slicer. But by default, it's in the same way. So we don't have to make any changes here. And then the next thing that we're going to do is instead of returning 1, I want to, return the icon that I want to show when it's selected versus not selected. Okay, now where can you find these icons? Now there are websites like unicodetable.com where you can look for icons and then just copy them over to Power BI. For example, over here I found a checkmark that I want to use. I can already copy it, go back to Power BI. And here we're going to write a new measure similar to what we had before. So slicer highlight show, but I just want to keep that one and create a new one. So new measure, paste it in here. Now the logic stays exactly the same, but here, what do I want to return? Now I don't want to return a 1, but the icon that I want to show. Okay, and it needs to be in between quotation marks. Now that icon you just have to copy over, and then you do the same for the icon that you want to show when it's not selected. So let's say that cross over here. All right, so you see similar logic. And then we can give it a different name. So instead of show, I replace show with icon. Now if we then go to our table and replace highlight show with highlight icon, then now instead of a 1 or nothing, you see the crosses and the check marks. So let me just change the selection in slicer and see it works. Okay, now what's the next thing? Now somehow we need to get rid of that first column. However, as soon as you start resizing that first column, then it wraps it, okay? So we have to change that in the formatting options. So let's go to format, and then here we can go to values, and we want to turn text wrap off. And the same for the column headers. Also there you find text wrap, turn it off, and then we can resize now that first column so that nothing shows. And that second column, also just make it as wide as it needs to be, all right? And then we can resize the whole table visual just like this. Now the next part is then to align it again with the items of the slicer. So I'm going to take over here our little table, and I'm going to put it here on the left-hand side of my slicer, just like this. And then we can go to general properties and play again with the position. And once it overlaps, then we have to play around with the padding. So we have to go back to the visual. And then here we have the grid options. And here we have row padding and font size. So here, if we turn the padding a little bit higher, you see, it starts to get a little bit better aligned. And you just have to go back and forth with repositioning it so that it exactly aligns. Now, once you have done that, you probably also want to take the table and then go here to format your visual general, and under effects, also choose the same background color. So white in this case, and then 0% transparency. Now you also see that I'm overlapping now the title of the slicer. So here, the only workaround is to take the slicer then, and then go here to general, turn that title off, and then just realign it again a little bit. So let's put it down. Then over here, I'm going to turn the shadow off, just like this. And then we just need a text box in the background. All right, so text box, and let's type in as the title department again, and then choose the font size. So Sugui, and I want to have font size 11, and I want to have it in the middle. And for the background color, we can go to effects, turn the background on, and make it white with 0% transparency. Now, of course, you have to send it again to the back. So we want to have it all the way in the back, and there you go. And to that shape, you can then add a little bit of shadow. All right, so over here, you can add a bit of shadow. Let's make it a bit softer. So let's go for custom. And then here, we can put the transparency to, let's say, 85%. Now, of course, then you want to take your items and group them together. We have to organize everything here in the selection pane. So let's go to selection. And then once you have all three of them selected, group them. And then you can call this one SLICER department. And then we can reposition it. And then take that other chart that we had there before, place it back where it used to be. All right. Okay, and now let's republish it and see if it works. And here in Power BI Service, let's give it a try. I'm going to change the selection. You see, it nicely works. We have our own custom icons in our slicer. Now, one extra benefit that we didn't discuss yet is that we can also add now tooltips to the slicer items. For example, with that bar chart example from before, if I hover over it, like over one of the items, then you see we have a tooltip, and that tooltip we can customize. But that I leave for the next video. Now, of course, it takes quite a bit of effort to create a slicer like this, and I also hope that in the future, this becomes easier. And you also have to consider, well, we need 3 shapes that we then grouped to create that slicer. And every object needs to be loaded, so it will take a bit longer to open up your page. So it is a trade-off, loading time versus better design. Now, there's one slicer design option that I didn't talk about yet, and that is dropdowns. So let's create one and see what formatting options we have there. So I have over here a slicer, and I'm going to take the department field and drop it on there. Okay, now to turn that one into a dropdown, just click here in the top right corner, dropdown. Now for dropdowns, they look quite okay. However, we can still make them look a bit better. So let's take over here the slicer, go to formatting options, values, and then here we have again values border background, and we could give it maybe a white background. All right. So that you don't see really that border line that we have over there, but just the whole background is white. And then when we open it, it's also consistent with the color over there. You could also say, okay, I'm gonna go for maybe that green color that we have there. So then we can go here to values, and then here we can go to background and choose the same color green. Now for the values themselves, you probably then want to switch to white. All right, so that when we open this up, everything is consistent. Okay, then here for the department that we have here in the header, there you again have the option, are you going to go for the slicer header, or maybe here the title, and then here use this one where you have a few more formatting options. So here we can say, okay, it needs to be white, maybe you want to have it in the middle, and then we can also make it a bit bigger, just like this. But that's basically it for dropdowns. I usually don't touch any other formatting options. For example, over here, the values, the borderlines don't really make it that much better. For example, if I have a borderline to the left, open it up, it just looks weird, okay? And what bothers me is now also these checkboxes are gray, but you cannot change the color. So maybe that white background was a little bit cleaner. So you have to be a little bit careful here so that your design matches well with the limited formatting options that are there for slicers until we get more formatting options. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope you got some new ideas for how to make the design of your slicers just a bit better given the formatting options that are out there. Now just let me know what design or formatting options you will be looking forward to for a new updated slicer and hopefully one of the next Power BI versions. Now if you're looking for more ideas around slicers, then check out one of these videos over here. And I want to thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.